So why don't we start things off with your 10 days of solitude? Because I think that will set the scene for a lot of people on who you are and what you're all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So in October of this year, so about a month and a half ago, I spent 10 days completely and intensely alone. I live in Los Angeles. I flew to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, spent 3 days in a small cabin in Idaho, in the foothills of eastern Idaho, and spent 7 more days in absolutely desolate northern Wyoming, 22 acres, just empty with mountains in the background. And I loved it.
Wow.
And
So
yeah.
take us through it, my man. Take us through. Like, where did you get this idea to do this? Was this something that you've always been thinking about, or were you just like, oh, you know what? I gotta do. Like, where did that come from? Not many people have this thought of I need to spend time alone, and I think it speaks to who you are to break that down for us.
It's something I've been wanting to do for at least a year. So about a year ago, I started a new job. I am the course director for Forte Academy, two flagship online courses, Building a Second Brain, Rite of Passage. And my whole world is student experience for these courses. So I'm constantly jumping on Zoom calls, answering emails, sending emails, helping run classes. So by the time the summer rolled around, early fall, I felt very enriched in my work life, but totally overstimulated in terms of emails and texts and WhatsApps. And sometime in September, I was working on a Saturday and I was just like, man, I need a break. I just need a break from all the noise. And so I pulled up Airbnb. I just dragged the map to the western half of the United States and just started, set a price filter and just started searching for cabins. Went through a bunch, found two that looked just about perfect, and booked up the trip. So that's kind of how it all came about.
So you had no Wi-Fi and you had no screens, and you were just saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to make the most out of this experience. What did you learn? What did you uncover in those 10 days of solitude?
Yeah, a few things. I'll start with a little story where I'm driving. I get there at night. This first cabin was near the town of Driggs, Idaho. Has a population of 871 people. And I pull the rental car up and it's completely pitch black. I don't even have service on my phone, but I had read the directions. I was pretty sure I was on the right country road. It's 4,000 West. They don't even have road names out there. They just give them numbers. And so I pull up to this little dark cabin and I kill the engine and I step outside. And the silence was so intense, it was deafening. It was just this absolute silence pounding in from all sides, blanket of stars above my head. And I just took a few deep breaths and I was like, let's go. I'm so glad I did this trip. I had a few doubts, like, is this a weird thing? Like, I told my parents I was doing this 10-day retreat and they couldn't understand, don't you want to do something on your trip? But I knew I wanted to do this. In that first moment of silence, I just confirmed, because it was just like a wash in silence, just confirmed that this is exactly the right thing for me to be doing. So yeah, a few different things I got from it. Number one, just not having any screens, any texts, any emails. Pretty quickly, I'd say by the first sort of mid-morning, early afternoon, I felt this subtle sense of calm creeping in that just seemed to increase throughout the week. And it's just like the feeling when you take a few deep breaths, but on this macro scale, where you're just doing that over the course of, a couple hundred hours. And so that was great. That's one of the first things I expected. Number two was just the joy of not having to worry about clocks, where I would wake up whenever I woke up, whenever the sun kind of rose. And I just had a literal suitcase full of books, and whatever book I most wanted to read, I would read it for as long as I wanted. If I was hungry, I would eat. If I didn't want to eat lunch, I might not eat till 5 p.m. It was just full agency and autonomy to do whatever I wanted and just have that almost cleansing process of the mind and from having that agency and having that space. And so, there's a lot we can talk about. I certainly feel like it increased my inner sense of inner vastness. And that's sort of a vague thing. What does that mean? Well, it's one of those things when you describe it, it doesn't really capture it. You more have to feel it, right? And people can find this different ways. You don't have to go to a cabin in the Western US for 10 days to find this, but it seemed to be a pretty effective way. So it's one path to finding that inner vastness, at least getting a few glimpses of it before returning to normal life.
Have you ever done anything like this before?
I did a miniature version 2 years ago. Right after New Year's, I my parents have a cottage on the Chesapeake Bay. So went out there and spent 3 days alone. And even that, I really loved. It didn't even feel like enough. Again, I didn't even bring my phone. I just took time off of work, and it was very quiet and very cold. It got dark early, and I read 3 books and took some walks, things like that. But I loved it, but I wanted more. And then just the way work shook out and stuff, I wasn't able to do it again for 2 years. But I had a bit of a history with this, so I knew it was something that would work if I went ahead and did it.
Very cool. And so I'm going to tell you my experience very briefly about doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 5-day retreat I did by myself, and I never experienced anything like this. And this is when I saw you have this post, I was like, I got to talk to this guy because this is someone that I want to speak to. This is why I created this podcast. And what I found is that after day 4 or in the middle of day 3, I found myself forgetting who I was. Like no one was telling me I'm Danny Miranda. No one was texting me. No one was calling me by my name. So because I was forgetting who I was, it was allowing me to then create any story that I wanted to in the future and allow me to see myself in third person of who I was being and what I could do in the future. So I'm curious if you had a similar experience doing this for 10 days.
Yeah, gosh, that's really interesting. I had something similar where I would go out and take these long walks. So I was mostly reading. I love to read, and I felt like I hadn't had enough time to read just throughout the year with work. So I would get up and read most of the day. I would do some writing, do some journaling, but around 5 p.m. every day, right when the sun is hitting that golden hour, reflecting down on the mountains, hitting the clouds, I'd go out and take a walk. There was a spot in Wyoming had 22-acre property. So I'd take these long loops around the entire property with these incredible views. And it's that same, just similar to what you're describing, where I just felt bigger. Again, there's just sense of vastness and not so tied down to the exact moment, where I could do things like think about the future, think about where I'm going. Ask the big questions. One thing I kept thinking about, it's like sort of just what do you want out of life? And that sounds like such a fundamental question, but you don't often get a chance to really think about that in a big picture way and just sort of grapple with that and ponder that. And I read a book. The first book I read on the trip was Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. One of the 2 most incredible, profound books I've ever read. And he talks in that book about needing solitude in order to really ask yourself the big questions in life. One of the things he talks about, he's writing a letter to a young poet, a guy who's 20, trying to be a poet. He says, do you really want to write? Do you feel called to write in your bones? If so, then write. And if not, don't. But that's something that was on my mind because I've begun writing the past year. I've published essays online, but I hadn't been doing as much writing during the year. And that was something I was pondering over. Like, do I feel called to write? And sure enough, certainly felt called on the trip. Went and wrote my first essay after the trip on the experience itself. And that was really a powerful thing for me, just thinking about being creative and, what do I really feel called to do? So I'm curious if you had any of the creative stuff flowing, or is more the just sort of seeing yourself in third person like you talked about. Like, what are the biggest things that came up for you?
The biggest thing that came up was how long the day actually was.
Yeah.
We don't sit there really and think about the sun rising. And you mentioned in your essay, I can't remember the last time I really took in a sunrise. Oh, really? And so I felt that in my bones when you wrote that. And I also was very surprised by, I didn't use clocks either, and I didn't use time. I was surprised by just the way the sun moved. And it was in the middle of the summer, and it was beautiful, and the days were long, and I really felt like, oh, does my body need to sleep now? Does it need to rise now? What do I need? And I think in our modern world, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how our body feels and how our mind feels, and then doing our actions to that. We are more so taken by notifications, distractions, screens, which can all be very useful, but we're responding to them as opposed to responding to how we innately feel in ourselves. So that's kind of what I took from the trip in general.
100%. The sun was such a big thing for me too. It sounds so basic. The sun, right? It's there every day. But yeah, when you aren't called to be somewhere throughout the day, you just have this lazy time stretching out in front of you. The sun just felt different. You mentioned this, the sunrise, which I was sitting there watching the sunrise. I was so moved by it. And I was like, when was the last time I watched a sunrise? I couldn't even remember the last time I just watched the entire process of the sunrise from dark to light. And another thing, one day I was journaling. It's kind of towards the end of the trip. I was sitting and journaling by a window, and the sun was coming in and falling on my journal. And then I was just watching the sun move, not in the sky, but the way it fell on the table. And it had nothing to do. So I just sat there and sort of mesmerized as this line of light moved across the table. And that struck me too. I don't even know if I can fully articulate why. I think it's something about that innate humanness for however many tens of thousands of years. That's all people did. They didn't have, the iPhone clock telling them what time it was or the Zoom appointment. They just had the suns. There's something there tapping into that deep human nature. I think it sounds like we both felt it, even if you can't, it's hard to express the full extent of it.
You mentioned you feeling a vastness, and I'm curious, have you thought about the ways in which you can take that feeling that you got in the trip and bring it to the modern life? Have you thought about that specific element at all?
I have. A few things come to mind. First of all, I read Walden by Thoreau, naturally, if you're on a trip like that. I had never read Walden before. And one of the lines from Walden, he just says, simplify, simplify, simplify. And that rang through my head when I read it. And then after the trip, was how can I simplify? I got home from the trip. One of the first things I did, I had 2 days off before I did hop back into the working cycle. And I just went through my room. One of those days where you just dig through your closets and your drawers and your books and I had 6 full trash bags to Goodwill and gave that away. So that was something I did right after the trip. And then the other thing was simplify, not just in the physical sense, but in terms of my informational inputs. And so, I use Twitter a lot. I like Twitter a lot. I think Twitter is the best social media platform for a lot of reasons. However, I would still spend so much time scrolling Twitter. So I follow about 800 people on Twitter. I muted every single person I follow. So I don't follow anybody right now. I can still go find people's tweets. I have some lists that I make to keep up with certain accounts. But since 2 months ago, I have not followed anybody on Twitter. So every time I have that habit of logging onto the platform, but there's nothing there to read. And so I'm using it to publish my own ideas, but I'm consuming a lot less. So I think that's a huge theme for me coming out of the trip, is just shifting the burden from mostly consuming towards mostly creating, or at least evening those two sides out a lot. I know for myself and a lot of people, I think these days, you're way over indexed on consuming information because there's so much out there. Even if it's really good information, it's not just some celebrity news or whatever. It's really rich, great information from these phenomenal Twitter accounts. But even that consumption can be too much. And so balancing out that creating and consumption has been a big thing for me coming out of that experience.